It's episode 74 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com, and while you're there, please click on the iTunes link and subscribe to the show, and leave a comment if you like, or at least click on the stars to rate the show. It really does help other people find us, and make sure that more people hear the great content that we're putting out each week. This week, my guest is Wesley Chu, an author that I was very excited to have on, and I hope you enjoy the interview as much as I enjoyed doing the interview. Looking back on this year, 2015 has been an excellent year, and it's time to do some of those year-end retrospectives. We're going to have some more of those coming up in the next couple of weeks. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy my interview with Wesley. Click on the Amazon links. Do your shopping for Christmas through the Amazon link at hankgarner.com. It helps the show. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays from me and my family and from the Author Stories podcast. Here's my interview with Wesley. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. This week, my very special guest is Wesley Chu, actor, author, kung fu master, and apparently best friend of Michael Jordan. Welcome to the show, Wesley.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, Wesley, I begin each show by asking a variation of the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer?
So I've told this story before, but the first time I ever realized I wanted to be a writer was in second grade. I wrote a short story about the solar system where, all the planets used to run into each other, and that's why they have all those pock marks on their bodies. And then, they get into all these fist fights and all these complaints, and then they basically complain to the sun, who is the king. And then after a few eons, the sun got annoyed at all the planets, so he forced gravity upon them, which is why we now have this, solar system. And my father, who's an English professor, read the story, and it was like, this doesn't suck. which for Asian parents is very a high compliment. So
I love it.
So that was the first time I wanted to be a writer, and I actually spoke with my when I was 16, trying to figure out what to do for college. I'm like, Dad, I'm gonna be an English major just like you, but instead of being a professor, I'm gonna write books for a living. And my dad was like, no, son, your life will suffer. So he said that, and I followed his advice, and I didn't become an English major, and I went into something else entirely. And then I spent most of my 20s and half my 30s chasing that mistake.
Mm. So did you, during your formative years, your adolescence, high school, and that sort of thing, did you write any more, or was that one experience? Did you just kind of file that away, and was this something that nagged at you, or did you just put it away?
I've never really tried writing until later on in life. I read a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know what I grew up in the 80s. Okay, so
did I.
Excellent. But back in the 80s, in grade school, do you remember those brochures that they hand out in class? It's 5 pages of books, and then the students can pick what books they want to order.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It would have these book fairs from time to. You would get an advance little brochure or catalog, and yeah.
Right. So you get the catalog. And then you pick books out, and then a few weeks later, you get this box of books.
Yeah.
So and that was the biggest deal for me back when I was a kid. And it got to the point where I ordered so many books that I ran out of books to order from those catalogs.
Nice.
Yeah. You get your sci-fi fantasy stuff, and then after a while, I was like, well, I already have everything here, so I guess I'll go to Judy Blume, and then I'd be like, I guess I'll go to. What is that? Valentine? Animal Inn. Yeah. I would do Animal Inn, basically. So I started going to what they consider girl books because I literally ran out of books to order from these catalogs. And that was probably, those were my formative writing years. I just read a whole shit ton.
Yeah. Well, and as anyone who writes knows that to be a good writer, you've got to be a really deep reader, and yeah, I think that's probably one of the best things that any writer could do is to make sure that they're full of material to spark imagination and to understand how prose works and all of that. Do you wish that you would have gotten an English degree instead of? I think you majored in some sort of IT, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I studied computer science.
Yeah.
So here's the thing: is like for a while, I was unhappy that I didn't go into I didn't go to English from in college. Part of me thinks, well, I could have been prolific. I could be published, 20 years now and have 15 books out and be a bestseller, blah, 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 blah. But then I also realized that I could be an English major and end up teaching 8th grade English in some, junior high in Oklahoma and get burned out by the time I was 25.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I work, the technology I worked with when I was in corporate gave me a very good career. And it put me in a situation where I never had to write to eat.
Yeah.
So it's the thing of unless you're a genius or you're really talented, that first novel, you're going to make all these mistakes and you're going to put your heart and soul into it, and you're probably going to trunk it. My first novel was so bad, but it was like 180,000 word low fantasy where I made every single mistake you could think of. But at the time I was writing it, I was like, this is the best thing in the world. And when I trunked it, it was the most heartbreaking thing. But, I wasn't writing to eat. I was writing for fun. It was something I wanted to do, something I wanted to try. I did it in my spare time. I didn't have this pressure where, like, if I don't finish this book, if I don't publish it, I won't be able to make rent, in 3 months.
Yeah.
So, and that's a good, when you give yourself that kind of breathing room, especially early on in your career, it really allows you to enjoy the process a lot more, and you won't burn out as easily.
And there's something to be said for allowing your writing to mature and grow in a natural way without putting that pressure on it. That's a recipe for disaster. Saying I'm going to write a book so that I can pay rent. It's probably not going to happen for most people.
That's actually the worst thing. I mean, here's the thing: is even if you have a great book, okay, let's say you have a great book and it sells. Unless your book goes up for auction, it's not going to be a huge advance. And then on top of that, publishing moves at like a snail's pace. So you're not actually going to see a lot of money until you're not even going to really get your contracts worth of money until you deliver the book, and that's probably at the very least 6 to 8 months down the road. And then you get paid every 6 months, and it's you really need probably I would say unless you're Patrick Rothfuss, probably like 5 to 10 books with right. With your backlist selling pretty well before you can make a pretty good living off of it.
Yeah. So that first book, how old were you when you wrote that, the low fantasy that you trunked?
Oh man, that's 25.
Okay.
25. Yeah, no, actually about 20, 27, 28 maybe.
Yeah.
It was 180,000 words. I had no idea what I was doing. I just, I thought it was fantastic. My dad liked it. I mean, he said it didn't suck, so I thought it was good. It was called Woes, Toads, and Crossroads, and it was like a third person YA about this down on his luck, magic student trying to pay for school by becoming a caravan guard, guarding manure, guarding like a manure fertilizing caravan.
That's great.
Seriously,
Yeah. Do you ever have plans to dust it off?
No one will read it ever. It is the worst book I've ever written, and it's probably the most important book I've ever written because I learned a lot from it. After I realized that this is not a great book, I got drunk for a week, and then I started the next book, which became The Lives of Tao.
Wow. Do you think there's something to be said for not finding immediate success and having to kind of work for it? Is there some sort of benefit to having some life experience under your belt? As opposed to having a breakout novel at maybe 20 years old.
Look, to be honest, I don't know what it feels like to have a breakout novel at 20 years old, so I can't answer that question. I mean,
yeah.
Look, when I worked corporate, okay, The Lives of Tao was my second book, and I wasn't really part of the community until, 2012. And to be honest, I didn't even know the community existed. I was that guy who sat in the cafes by himself for like hours on end, like abusing the bottomless cup of coffee policies. And
right.
For some reason, I never bothered looking, on the internet for other writing communities until like 2011. And so it was. I would say I've had a pretty decent rise from when I first joined the community. But I would think if somebody became a big success at 20 years old with their first novel, there's different pressure attached to that, like for example, I'm not going to give examples, but I know a few authors who've had huge books right out of the gate, and then they have this tremendous pressure then to repeat that success.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a lot to take in, especially at 20 years old.
Well, look at someone like Ernest Cline, who had such an amazingly successful book with Ready Player One, and then everyone was chewing their fingernails waiting for Armada, and I really enjoyed the book, but it was received with very mixed.
Okay.
Yes. And I think everyone was expecting Ready Player 2, and it just wasn't. And that's a lot of pressure, on a debut book to follow up like that.
Ernest Cline was my example. That I didn't want to throw his name up, but since you already did, all right. Yeah, Ernest Cline is the perfect example of of a guy who just came out with a home run, and I wouldn't say he missed, but Armada definitely wasn't as fantastic of a book as Ready Player One is. But let's be honest, that was almost impossible to replicate that success.
Exactly, and if Armada would have been the first book followed up by Ready Player One, everyone would have been ecstatic.
Right.
But
or he probably would have that kind of success. I don't know.
Right.
Another example. Martin Weir wrote The Martian, and it basically killed everything.
Yep.
So here's the question now: The Martian came out 2011?
Yep.
So now everybody's like, well, what's this next thing? And is he going to be able to do The Martian 2? Which I know he's not writing The Martian 2. He's writing he's got a sci-fi book about aliens coming out.
Right.
But he's going to have that kind of scrutiny to be that successful. You could be somebody like that, or you could be like George R. R. Martin. George spent decades just slogging as a mid-list author.
Yep.
And then he wrote the Game of Thrones, and he sold it for a good chunk of money. And even then, Game of Thrones took a few years to get big. But by the time it got big, where it's all George all the time, he's been in the business for 40 years, and he can handle it.
Right.
Because if that happened to me, it'd be over. I would I would be dead on the street with a cocaine overdose or something.
So you mourned the death of that first book, and you say you got drunk for a week, and then you began on The Lives of Tao. What sparked that story for Lives of Tao? Where did it come from, and did you consciously set out to do things differently from the first book, or was this just a new inspiration and you just went with it?
Um, so the Lives of Tao is a very personal story for me because I kind of mirrored my writing career the same way I wrote Rowan Tennant's Journey. Basically Rowan is me. If you like Rowan, you'll like me. If you don't like Rowan, you'll probably hate my guts. Um, and so the thing is like it's the Lives of Tao is in essence a late coming of age story. You know, I basically Rowan and I were just working these jobs, so we were really unhappy. We were trying to find a way out, and it's that kind of journey that was the main story I wanted to tell. But I wanted to do it in a way where it was still science fiction, yet Rowan earned his success. He had help in the form of a wise alien in his head who was cheerleading him on. But at the end of the day, he was the one that lost weight. He was the one that worked out and really applied himself, to improving himself. So that was the story I wanted to tell. As for learning all the mistakes, I made a lot of mistakes in the first book, and it's not that I sat down and go, okay, here are all the mistakes I made, but it was a cumulative experience of having a first novel, editing it probably incorrectly or prematurely, and then not giving it a good enough practiced eye on what needs to change. And I think it took a lot of that. I took a lot of that experience and applied it to the Lives of Tao.
Gotcha. So, what did you how long did the book take you to finish? First off,
Well, so here's the thing. I wrote the first draft in like a year, I guess in 2007, and then I got caught up playing World of Warcraft for 3 years because I was a guild officer in the #1 guild on my server. So and I was the recruiting officer. So basically, anyways, it was I learned project management playing World of Warcraft, but it was very all encompassing. So for 3 years, I literally just like obtained fat loots, doing raids, and I didn't write that much until like 2010 when I'm like, what am I doing with my life? And that's when I got back into trying to get published, and that's when I took the Lives of Tao out. I gave it another good edit, and I started submitting it. No, actually, I entered it into the 2011 Angry Robot open submission. So for 1 month in March of 2011, anyone could submit to Angry Robot. So I did that, and they had 955 submissions, and and out of those 955, they weeded it out. There were different process, like different levels, I guess. And at the very end, 25 books made it to acquisitions, and 5 got deals. So I was one of those 5. It's like the Thunderdome of of publishing.
yeah, that's crazy. And such a different story than a lot of authors have. Stephen King talks about when you finish a book, put it in the drawer and kind of walk away from it for a while so that you can come back with a different perspective and maybe you're not so close to the story. Did that help with Lives of Tao that you not that everyone should go play World of Warcraft for 3 years, but you definitely got some distance from the book by doing that. When you came back to it, did it feel different? Were you able to critically look at things and with a new eye and see things that need to change, or maybe even appreciate your work?
You know what? That would definitely be the case. But the thing is, well, when I came back to the Lives of Tao after like 2-3 years, I realized that I had a pacing problem, and that was one of the reasons why. Because I think in 2007, 2008, I did a small round of submissions, and I got some interest, and I received a rejection, a reject and R&R, a reject and revise request from a pretty big agent, And at the time, I couldn't see that I had a pacing problem, and it took me those 2-3 year break for me to go back to it and go, yeah, now I see that pacing problem. So that it definitely helped.
Yeah, I don't think people, and this goes back to our discussion earlier about the putting the pressure on the writing, and I think we live in such an immediate society, and I've got to get this thing written, got to get it out the door. That it really takes patience and diligence to be able to say, I'm just going to set this aside for a little while. I'm going to do something else, and I'll come back to it. Would you have any advice for people on how to manage that?
I mean, here's the thing: is I these days I write pretty fast, so I'm on a 2-book-a-year publication schedule, and my advice for that, I mean, and so I publish about 400,000 words a year.
Nice.
And the thing about that is, a little when you're a pro, I am now writing to eat, and that's something that that I'm very cognizant of. Is if I'm not selling books, if I'm not publishing and looking for the next contract, I became a full-time writer in 2014, and I made a deal with my wife, and she said, look, you have 2 years to make something of yourself. After those 2 years, you're getting a job. So that was part of the pressure. Is I came from a pretty good career, and when I went full-time writing, I took a 95% pay cut to become a full-time writer. So
wow.
So for me, when I'm writing 2 books a year, and I need that time, it's all about project management. It's you get that draft done, you give yourself 3 weeks to bake a little bit, and in the middle, I'm plotting my next book. I'm editing something else. I'm working on my website. I mean, you need that block of time to let things, give yourself some distance. But there's always more work that you got to do. Like my workload is never done.
Yeah. I recently had a career change as well, and am working from home full time. And
awesome, huh?
Yeah, well, it is awesome. But for the first 2 months, I'm like walking around in circles trying to figure out how to manage my time and what to do with myself. It's really, I think a lot of people think, oh man, if I could work for myself, if I could be a full-time writer, if I could be, full-time whatever, man, life would just be so awesome. It'd be so easy, and I could sleep till noon. And no, it does not work that way. What was the biggest challenge for you when your wife said, okay, you've got 2 years now? Like, how did you begin that, and did you lay out a plan, and kind of what was your process to get standing up and being able to do this?
Well, I mean, so the thing is, like, even at my old career, I was working at home like 2 days a week. And then in the last year before I became a full-time writer, I was working at home full-time. So it was a pretty easy transition for me to work at home. And personally, it's all about discipline. And for me, I'll say for me, it is all about discipline and desperation.
Oh yeah.
I come from a very, how people get inspiration from different places. Yeah. Mine is all from like self-loathing. Self-loathing and self-deprecation is like my tools of
Those are your superpowers.
Yeah. So for me, it's I mean, here's the thing is, I had one shot to make it work. I had enough discipline to know that, okay. So when you work at home, I would say the most important thing is actually the same thing I give, same advice I give to people who are starting out and they want to become published authors is the time writing is work. Writing is your job. And and just like any other job, you have metrics that you have to be accountable for. So whether your metrics is 3,000 words a day or 500 words a day, if that's your job, then you need to hit those numbers. If my job is to hit 2,000 words a day, and Star Wars is coming out, and I didn't hit those numbers. How do I address this? Do I say I don't go to Star Wars, or do I figure out a plan where I hold myself accountable to hit those numbers? A lot of beginning writers, writing takes a lot of time, and a lot of writers, and almost everybody who starts out writing, they already have a job, they already have a family, so their view is, I will write when I have time. I will write when I can find a few minutes to do it, and that's not how you handle it. That's not how you treat a job. If you have a job, you don't do your job when you have spare time. You do your job because that's your job. And if you want to become a full-time author, you got to treat that time. You got to treat that writing like it's a job. So you got to defend that 1 or 2 hours a day that you have allocated to write. If it means you can't go to Star Wars, or if it means you aren't going to your kids' band practice or whatever, then you got to figure it out, because that's how you transition into becoming a career writer. All right.
I completely agree with you. There's definitely a different mindset that has to come in when you say, okay, this is no longer a hobby. This is what I do now. And yeah. So Lives of Tao became a trilogy. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So how did you follow up? First off, I assume that since signing on with Angry Robot and getting that book out, you had a pretty good reception to the book?
It did a lot better than I thought it would do. Let's just put it that way. It sold pretty well, and I think the community's been great, and Barnes and Noble, they've been really behind the book ever since the beginning. So it's one of those books that they will always restock on their shelves.
Gotcha. I remember first seeing it in the bookstore, I guess maybe a couple of years ago, and the cover immediately grabbed my attention. Did you have any input to the cover design?
I had zero input, and to be honest, when I first saw the rough draft of the cover, I hated it. And here's the thing: is I am not a marketing guy. I am not, I like pretty. I wanted like a fucking portrait or like a painting or something, So I wanted art. But the purpose of a book cover is not to make the author happy. The purpose of the book cover is to sell books.
Right.
And Mark, who is the publisher at Angry Robot and the art director, I mean, he knew what he was doing. I mean, he created a cover that you can see from anywhere in the room, where if you put that book next to 1,000 beautiful books with art and portraits and whatever, that thing stands out.
Yes.
So and that's when I realized that I have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about when I want any. When I talk about, what I realized? I have really bad taste. I have really terrible taste. So,
yeah.
like for example, like I just redid my house. And I was like going all over the place, wanting this, that, these colors. I thought I was being, I don't know, edgy, cute, or whatever. And then we got an interior decorator who came in and was like, boom, 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 boom. And every time she recommended something, I thought it was terrible. And then when we put it all together, I'm like, this is a really good fucking room. I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. So these days, I'm all about the subject matter experts. I want people who know what the hell they're talking about to tell me what I should be wanting.
I love that. There's just like we don't want someone coming in and saying, I loved your book, but I really wish you would have done this. Well, you're not the expert here, but I will defer to the experts when necessary. I like that. So how did the 2 sequels come about?
They offered me a 2-book deal, and the day I signed the deal, I was like, I better get fucking working on the second book. Just here's the thing about your first book is when you everybody you have all the time in the world to write that first book. Yeah, film takes 5 years, 5 years plus years of Warcraft or whatever. You can write that first book leisurely. It usually is the first book, the one book you've always wanted to write. Suddenly, you sign a contract and it's going to get published. Then, you have deadlines. A deadline is usually a year to write the second book. So you have 5, 6, 7 years, whatever, to write the first book. You have 1 year to write the second book. You are contractually obligated to be creative. Right. It's great to have inspiration, but that's still your job now. I liken it a lot to like bands, like rock bands and stuff, where Nirvana's first album was great. They had time to write 30 songs and pick the best 12 or whatever, and but then it's the second album that really tells you if that band has staying power.
Yeah,
it's because they have that 1 year to have the next album, and now that they're under pressure they're contractually obligated to be creative. They have that 1 year to really show what their muster is, and that's what happened with the Depths of Tao. Was I had 1 year to write it, and it was even better received than the first book, and then we wrote the book 3. Actually, then I wrote Time Salvager, and then I wrote book 3.
I heard an interview years and years ago. I don't even remember who it was with, but they were, I think, talking about Lynyrd Skynyrd, the Southern rock band, and they were talking about that very thing, that they said they spent 10 years writing their first album and practicing and practicing and practicing, and then they became famous, and then everyone went home and bought houses, and they were picking out drapes when they should have been working on album number 2. And so he said that album number 2 or book number 2 is always the buying the drapes album, and that stuck with me. That was pretty great analogy.
Yeah.
So you got the 3 books. You said you wrote Time Salvager in between book 2 and 3. How did that book come about? And I believe you have a different publisher with Time Salvager, don't you?
It's a Tor.
Gotcha. How did that book come out, and how did you get signed with Tor?
So I think after I wrote The Depths of Tao, I had a little bit of every once in a while I get fatigued with the world. I love Rowan and Tao, and I will find it very difficult to replicate their relationship ever again in any of my books. However, after 300,000 words of hanging out with them, I just needed a break.
Yeah.
It's not them, it's me. I needed some time apart, and so I remember I had so what happened was, I read an article about this South African photojournalist named Kevin Carter, and he took a very iconic picture about the Sudan famine, where it's a very famous picture of this kid crawling towards an aid station, and there's this vulture hopping behind him, just waiting for him to die.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, it's a crazy picture, and he took the picture and he left because he was like, my job is a photojournalist, and I'm not here to get involved. So he left, and he won a Pulitzer for that picture, and then he committed suicide 11 months later. Oh, wow. So some of the facts have been disputed, whatever, but that was the article I read at the time, and it really stuck with me. And then at the time I read that article, I was on this anti-smoking drug called Chantix, which, by the way, completely works. And it gives you the best dreams in the world, super lucid dreams. I love that drug. Anyways,
so I don't smoke. Should I take that?
All I'm saying is I would almost take it even if I didn't smoke, just because it gave me some great dreams. But I do not recommend. I was just kidding, guys. I do not recommend that.
Yeah.
But so I think that article really stuck with me, and I was on Chantix, and I think it's a few days or weeks later, I had this dream that I was on the Titanic. And the dream was I was a time traveler who went back in time to steal the Hope Diamond. And at the time, I didn't know where the Hope Diamond was, so I was mingling with all the guests and everything. And just as the just as the ship was sinking, I woke up. And the first thing that came to mind was that is the best use of time travel to steal stuff. Is if I go in right before disasters, um, it covers my tracks. But then I thought about like all the people I met on that ship, and knowing that they were all gonna die, but I couldn't do anything to help them because my job as a time traveler was not to help them, but to steal the whole diamond. And that's when came up with the concept of time salvager. And I wrote a 35,000 word partial, gave it to my agent. We sold it relatively quickly, and then I had a year to write time salvager and Rebirth to Tell. And I've been on a 2-book schedule ever since.
Nice. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, and writing full time and being contractually obligated to be creative, and you're talking about where these ideas come from for like time salvager and things like that. How do you, being on a 2-book a year schedule, how do you keep yourself creative and keep those juices flowing and make sure that that you're catching good ideas when they come your way?
I mean, the first thing you do is you read a lot. Reading always helps. Read a lot,
Yeah.
play a lot of video games, watch a lot of movies. The more of life you experience, the better. For me, it's also about like life experiences. I did Kilimanjaro in February, and I mean, it was my first time in Africa. 7 days up a mountain, and I saw how all the Tanzanians lived, and I have an idea for a book just from that experience, and I'm
Nice.
dying to write it, and unfortunately I probably won't be able to get to it for another 2-3 years. But that was right now I have 2 good book ideas I want to try. Um, Unlike most, I know a lot of authors who have like 50 ideas, and they're just
Right.
dying to get to all of them, and they're all great. I'm one of those guys that live in fear of running out of ideas. So I have 2 ideas right now that I'm dying to get to, but right now I'm writing book 4, or not book 4. I'm writing a new trilogy in the Tau universe, so I'm contracted to do that. And between that, finishing the Time Salvager series, I'm trying to find time to start these new books. So it's a good problem to have. Being busy is a good problem to have, but
That's right.
yeah.
I'm always fascinated by where ideas come from, and especially like when you described where Time Salvager came from. You've got this iconic photo, then mixed with the Titanic and the Hope Diamond. Those two things. Uh, that is beyond bizarre that those two things merge and then become this whole other thing. Are you conscious of when these things pop in your head? Oh, I've got to write that down. I don't want to forget that. Or do you ever have brainstorming sessions where you try to make that happen, or do you just get, when they if you're like me, they just kind of fly in front of my brain and I have to catch it as it goes by.
I'm kind of like you. Every time I have brainstorming sessions, the ideas they're all stupid. Like
You're right.
anytime I consciously try to be like smart, witty, or high concept, and it never pans out.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow. When you wrote Lives of Tao, did you envision that as a trilogy?
Um,
Or did you envision the world big enough to write a trilogy and then another trilogy in the world?
I mean, here's the thing: is when you write your first book, all you care about is getting that first book published.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I know people who do think that far ahead, but at the time, I didn't dare hope to, think, oh, this is a trilogy for sure, or somebody's gonna want to buy 6 books of this universe. I didn't think that far ahead. Remember, my entire life is based off of like self-deprecation and self-loathing. So for me to be that confident that I could, write 6 books in this world, that was too much.
Was your process different for Time Salvager than it was for Tao? Obviously, you had the experience under your belt of putting out two really good selling books and ones that were very well received. When you then dropped into the idea of Time Salvager, did you begin it differently than you did when dealing with the other series?
I would say I began changing my process on the depths of probably, yeah, on Time Salvager and the Rebirth of Tao is as I became more of a career writer, I realized that I needed more structure. The Lies of Tao, I basically pantsed the whole thing, and it shows. It shows that I pantsed the whole thing. You can tell I pantsed it. But in the Depths of Tao, I go from one main point of view to three, and once you start, writing a more complicated story, you need to be more organized. And Rebirth of Tao is 5 points of view. Time Salvager is 3 to 4 points of view. So as I grew as a writer, here's the thing: is I started writing really late, so I'm still growing as a writer. And as I'm growing, I'm learning that the main thing to do is treat writing or give yourself as many tools as possible around the writing so that you can be as successful as possible. And part of it is being organized and having those outlines and and having the right tools. I use Skype as my primary writing tool. So getting all these things around you to support your writing, is a really important thing to have.
You use what as your primary writing tool?
Scrivener. I
Okay.
also have Eon Timeline, and I have no idea how to fucking use it, and it makes me so mad. Like I bought it, and I want to use it really badly because I write pretty complicated. When you have 5 points of view, it's really important to have that top level down, the bird's eye view of what's going on, so you can kind of figure stuff out. I just can't figure it out. I've actually emailed and tweeted at the guys who own Eon Timeline. I'm like, help me out, guys. Your tutorial sucks.
Oh, do you use any specific tools in Scrivener? Do you use the corkboard, or do you just use the folders to organize into an outline? Kind of what is your process?
Okay, so I use the corkboard. I use the synopsis. I use the metadata. So I use almost everything but the document notes. I always have 2 windows at all times. One usually is what I'm working on. The other is the outline or a previous chapter. I color label my points of view, and under status, I will change the status and retitle it as like, is this an action scene? Is it a plot scene? Is it a development scene? So I actually use a good amount of this tool.
That's great.
So no keywords,
yeah,
no metadata stuff, but
yeah. Well, as someone like you that began as a pantser and then quickly realized that I needed more organization, I found just in the beginning you creating separate folders and giving descriptions there to kind of lay out a roadmap, and I was like, oh man, this transformed the way I write. And then when you start making those little discoveries, it's easier to transition. I think outlining really intimidates people, the thought of it. But finding what works for you is not as hard as it seems.
I've learned over the years that like when I started, my first outline was for Death of Tao, and it was a pretty detailed outline out of about maybe for a 127,000 word book, it was probably a 2,000 to 3,000 word outline. Right now, I'm writing the Rise of Io, which is the first book in the new trilogy based in the Tao universe, and my outline is about 15,000 words.
Wow.
So
that's pretty intense. Some people would call that a long short story.
yeah, but well, here's also what I realized is I have never ever so I'm trying something new this time around too. So I have never actually successfully followed an outline from beginning to end. I think it's always around like a 30-40%. I jump the rails. Around like 70%, I always jump the rails there. So what I'm trying this time around is I'm sorry. So the Time Salvager 2 was the outline that had 15,000 words. So
Okay.
for the Rise of Io, I have a 7,000 word outline that is only the first 40% of the story. And
Wow.
the reason why is because I always jump the rails at like 30-40%. And then I gotta redo the whole damn thing. So I'm trying like a hybrid pantser plotter thing where I want to be organized to an extent, but it still gives me some freedom for my plot and my characters to kind of like do a little exploring, you know.
Yeah.
So and then after I get to that 40%, then I'll do the next 30% of the outline to see where they're going based on
Well,
how they feel at that time.
I guess it's, you could say that you're going to drive from New York to Los Angeles, and we all know where you're beginning and where you're ending, but there's several routes you could take along the way, and every place you choose to stop for lunch is, dependent on the day. I understand. I tend to kind of use an outline and then give myself freedom to kind of dip in and out of it. Um, that'll be interesting to see how your writing goes using that kind of method.
It does have some minuses. I think I'm not comfortable knowing that I actually don't know what's going to happen 4 chapters down the line, and I'm getting to that point where I just hit 40,000 words on this book, and I feel that pressure of I only have like two. I only know what's going on for another like 2 chapters, and then I don't know what's going to happen after that. Yeah, it's a weird pressure for me to have now.
Yeah. Well, I hope that anxiety stays down so you can get through it. That'd be great. Um, we talked a little bit before we started recording about your acting, and you had a major role in one of my favorite Christmas movies, Fred Claus. Uh,
Is that really your favorite one of your favorite Christmas movies?
No, it's a movie we watch every Christmas because it's funny and kind of bad but yeah, when I realized you were in it, I was like, oh well, that's we just watched it the other night, and yeah, it's you've got to throw in the corny Christmas movies every year. But how has acting affected your writing, or has it? Does it allow you a creative outlet, or is this just another tool in your toolkit?
I mean, I did. I acted and did stunt work before I became a writer, and I think it shows in my writing. I have a I like to think that I have pretty good timing for dialogue in the Tao books, and the Tao books have humor in it, and humor is hard to do, especially in science fiction and fantasy. You don't see a lot of it. You could put a few guys who do it well, but there aren't that many. And part of it's because of my training, and also because you get a good year for that, or because good humorous dialogue is all about timing.
Right.
And I would say the acting really helped for that. In terms of the stunt work, I'm a martial artist, and I basically choreographed all the fight scenes in the first book. I used to be able to fight and do everything in that first book in terms of action scenes.
Wow.
And part of it is, once it's one thing to write things down and to kind of like visualize in your head. It's another for you actually reenact it, in terms of spacing, timing, how heavy is a sword or a staff or a handgun, and how much effort does it take to swing something? How long does it take to cover ground? I mean, a lot of these things people tend to gloss over because they just don't think about it until they actually hold a sword in their hand when they go, this thing is 4 pounds, and there's no way you can swing this fast or this many times or hold it in one hand for this long before you get tired. So there's all these factors that really come to the forefront once you actually experience it.
That's awesome. Wesley, thanks so much for taking time out to come on the show this week. Where can people find you and follow your work and get plugged in with everything that you do?
Okay. So my website is wesleychu.com, CHU. And I'm really active on Twitter. So if you want to find me on Twitter, it's Wes_Chu. Other than that, that's probably the best way to get hold of me. You can get my books at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and almost all the other bookstores. So, yeah.
That's right. And can we expect 2 new books in 2016?
So it hasn't been actually announced yet, and it will be announced soon, so I might as well just tell you now. But there is a Tao novella coming out in April of 2016, and it's gonna be like a bridge book in between the Tao trilogy and the New Isle trilogy. Time Salvager 2, currently named Time Siege, is coming out in July of 2016. And then The Rise of Io, the first book in the New Isle trilogy, is coming out in October of 2016.
Wow, so 3 releases from you in 2016.
Yes, sir. Desperation.
Man.
My desperation is strong.
Well, the quote, "I don't have a muse, I have a mortgage," yes. is a great one to live by. Wesley, thank you so much for coming on the show. Your insights are wonderful, and I have absolutely loved Time Salvager and Lives of Tao, and I'm going to send everyone over to pick up those books and to come connect with you on the web. Thank you so much.
Awesome, thanks for having me.